Hello and welcome to the latest episode in the Canadian Division preview for the upcoming NHL season on the Unparalleled Success Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Woods, and joining me today will be Matt Wilson, as in just a moment we will be previewing the upcoming season for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Alexi Yashin, Chris Phillips, Boggett, Smollett, Mike Fisher, Marian Hossa, Martin Havlat, Pizza Line, Ray Emery, Brian Murray, Redden, Lee Cowan, Smith, Neal, Fat by Guide Walrus, Chara, Heatley, Alfie all left the team, Andrew Hammond, Kyle Tursa, Benajat, Double D on Mark Stone, Carlson, Matt Duchesne to single, Hogberg, Shabata, Chuck, Unparalleled Success. We didn't start the rebuild. It was always brewing since 2009. We didn't start the rebuild. No, we didn't start it, but this time we've got it. I'm Ryan Woods, and joining me today is Matt Wilson, Maple Leaf superfan. How's it going, Matt?
See, I wouldn't call myself a Maple Leaf superfan, because when you think of Maple Leaf superfan, you think of Steve Dangle, you think of Platinum Sea Ghost, before we get into it, let's get this out of the way. I enjoyed the Toronto media. A lot of people hate the Toronto media, but I enjoy listening to Overdrive. I enjoy listening to Steve Dangle podcast. I met Steve in person. I have his book. I don't know, you can't see it on the camera, but it's behind me somewhere on that shelf, right? But I wouldn't consider myself a super fan, because when the Leafs lose, and they lose in the playoffs every year, it's not a hit to the chest. It's not a hit to the heart. Like, if the Buffalo Bills lost on Saturday, I would have been distraught, and I almost was distraught because they almost lost that game. But in terms of hockey, wouldn't call myself a super fan, but I seem to have a general grasp of what's going on with the Leafs, and I'm excited to break it down for you. Lots of off-season moves, and the season getting underway this week. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Bills game on the weekend. That was wild, of course, with the fumble. That call should have absolutely been overturned, so you must have been sweating bullets there for the Hail Mary attempt in the final seconds. But
there was some choice words at the TV on Saturday afternoon. We'll put it that way.
Definitely interesting to hear your perspective on that, like being a Bills fan, and that you're not as absolutely crushed as everybody else is in the Leafs fan space when they disappoint in the playoffs. But that brings me to my first question. Of course, last year there were some high expectations, as always, in Leafland, and they were hovering around the wild card spot for the most of the season. Of course, we'll never know if they would have made it in if it weren't for the season being canceled, but we do know they lost to the Blue Jackets in the play-in round. What do you make of a team that barely technically qualified for the playoffs last season, and the off-season moves that were made by Kyle Dubas?
Well, when you look at the Leafs in last season for them, they had a horrible start, and most of that was due to brand new NBC sports analyst Mike Babcock, of course, hired at NBC today. They had a pathetic start, and once Sheldon Keefe came in, they kind of started going. Tyson Barrie scored 2 goals in his first 2 games there against the Coyotes and Colorado, and they started humming there right end of November, early December, right through Christmas. Then you get to that slow spot, January, February, and then the season gets canceled. Would they made the playoffs last year? I think they would have. It was them and the Florida Panthers kind of competing for that last spot before the COVID shutdown. I don't think the Panthers are very good, to be 100% honest with you. I could have seen the Leafs get into that spot, but yeah, they ended up losing in 5 games to the Columbus Blue Jackets. There's no excuse for that. But Kyle Dubas, of course, going out and acquiring a guy like Wayne Simmons, TJ Brody, Zach Bogosian, Joe Thornton, of course. Those are some big moves. TJ Brody, a really nice guy, could kind of solidify that pairing with Morgan Riley on the back end. You got Joe Thornton. He's a future Hall of Famer. He might only have a year or 2 left in him, but he can pass the puck like anybody that's ever played the game. And you got a guy like Wayne Simmons. He's a local Toronto guy. He's kind of that grit, that sandpaper type guy that goes in front of the net and makes some plays. Ex-Brockville Brave, of course, to the CCHL. And, of course, you got Zach Bogosian, who's very similar to Wayne Simmons. He's kind of a hard-nosed defenseman in front of the net. You're not getting much space when Zach Bogosian's on the ice. So, yeah, I think the Leafs had to do they did exactly what they needed to do this offseason. Of course, dumping a guy like Kapanen and Johnson, those guys were cap casualties, of course. But I really do think Kyle Dubas had a great offseason. It's going to be interesting to see how Sheldon Keefe kind of deploys these lines and how these guys kind of get into game action. Because as we've seen with the Sens and other teams, they've been doing these controlled scrimmage type things, but nobody's actually played an actual hockey game. A lot of these teams since March. So it's going to be really exciting to see how they get on the ice. But you know what? I was a fan of the offseason moves made by Kyle Dubas.
One of the most common narratives surrounding the Maple Leafs is that they don't have a strong enough defense to succeed in the playoffs, but anybody who watched the series against the Blue Jackets last year saw that that wasn't necessarily the case. Freddie Anderson stood on his head, and it was the offense that was nowhere to be found for a team that has their top four forwards making combined $40 million. Were you surprised that you didn't see any more major offseason moves this year?
See, there's always kind of the talk in Leafs Nation, and of course all the idiots you read on Twitter, Nylander has to go for a defenseman, maybe trade Marner while he's still kind of like his value's up here making $9 million a year, that sort of thing. But in terms of firepower up front, that top six is lethal. And I really don't know what you could have done to improve that top six. So that's why they kind of solidified that bottom six with Wayne Simmons. You got Jason Spezza returning, Joe Thornton, of course. Alexander Barabanov coming over from the KHL. I haven't seen him play yet. I had nothing on him. If we're going to get into Barabanov later, I don't have much to say. But, yeah, and, well, see, your star players, when you're paying star players, they got to play like star players. Auston Matthews, he ripped up that series, especially that game 4, I believe it was, when they scored in overtime. They came back, boom, 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 3 goals. But, yeah, that's interesting. It really is. You're paying the star players to perform, and when you're not performing, there's always going to be kind of questions surrounding your team. So it's going to be interesting to see what, especially as you mentioned, the 4 or 5 guys making the big money. It's going to be really interesting to see how they perform this year.
If I can add a follow-up question there, if you had to pick one of those 4 players who you could see on the way out in the future, would it be a guy like Nylander, who all the Twitter idiots, as you referred to them as, are pushing out the door, or would it be John Tavares, who may be soon starting to be on the decline, making $11 million, compared to Nylander, who has the best value contract out of the 4?
Yeah, see, it's interesting. You just hit the nail on the head. In terms of value, Nylander is by far the best, making $6.9 million. Honest to God, Ryan, it'd be Mitch Marner would honestly be the most expendable guy, and that's not because he's one of the best players in the league if you look at the general landscape, but in terms of what you can get in return and the money he's making per year, I wouldn't move any of these guys. I'd let these guys ride kind of into the sunset. Especially a guy like Tavares, you just gave him that contract. He's your captain. You kind of guaranteed him a lot of different things. In terms of if you absolutely had a gun to your head, you had to move one of those players, I'd move Marner out of the 4. That's just my take on it.
If we take a look at the lines for the upcoming season that I had you project for me, is there anything that stands out to you like a surprise of anybody that didn't crack the opening night lineup or that you think might not make it that you expected them to?
Yeah, I was going to say, there's lots. The way Sheldon Keefe's kind of deploying his lines here is interesting. A guy like Jimmy Vesey up playing second line left wing instead of a guy like Mikheyev is interesting. But in terms of the opening night lineup, not a whole lot of surprises. Nick Robertson, I could definitely see sliding into a spot where a Barabanov is currently projected to play. Travis Boyd's kind of a depth center that would have been like a first-line guy on the Marlies this year, and he will be, of course, if the Marlies get going. Rasmus Sandin, I could really want to see him get in on defense. Of course, he's on that taxi squad right now, but in terms of guys that the team for outright put on waivers and have released or sending down to the whatever the AHL is going to be this year, there's not a ton of surprises. Timothy Liljegren, I guess, would be probably the biggest surprise out of the bunch, but he hasn't really shown anything. He got mono there in his rookie year. He's kind of been it's interesting. He was the 18th overall pick back to 2017, I believe it was, and he's probably the most surprising guy. But with the taxi squad this year and the ability to kind of carry a couple extra guys with you due to COVID reasons and that sort of thing, it's going to be interesting to see because I do believe every single one of them, maybe outside of Adam Brooks, I don't know if he's really ready to make an instant impact in the NHL, but I could definitely see Nick Robertson getting in there this year. I could definitely see Travis Boyd maybe slotting in there for if there's an injury between like a Jason Spezza or a Kerfoot, that sort of thing. Maybe he comes up and plays bottom line center, that sort of thing. But of course, Mikko Lehtinen, who they signed out of the KHL, who was named Defenseman of the Year in the KHL last year, him and Rasmus Sandin, I definitely see them getting in the lineup as well. And if you have a goaltender industry, if Freddie Anderson and Jack Campbell go down, you have Aaron Dell, who's been a proven backup goalie, can slide right in there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the taxi squad works. And of course, for a team like the Ottawa Senators as well, I'm sure you've done this on other episodes. It's going to be fired into this episode. There's a lot of players, not a lot of open spots. It's going to be interesting to see how it works.
Is perhaps the biggest surprise for the deployment seeing like Joe Thornton, the oldest guys in the league, being on the top line with Matthews and Marner?
Yeah, it's. I'm really excited to see how Sheldon Keefe kind of deploys these lines because Joe Thornton, he can pass the puck. He's one of the best passers in the history of the game, right? But Matthews and Marner are going to be playing upwards of 20 to 22 minutes a night, that sort of thing, right? They're going to be up there, right? In terms of your top time on ice guys. Joe Thornton can't. He just won't be able to keep up. See him getting more 15, 16 minutes on the ice. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of deploy these lines because Joe Thornton's going to be on every first-line power play with Matthews and Marner. I'm excited to see how it goes to start the season, but look back on all previous seasons, you can see like what the lines were in training camp and what they were by the end of the season. It's like lines get put in a blender like 10 times during the regular season, right? But it's going to be interesting to see Joe Thornton start on that top line. And of course, a guy like Jimmy Vesey, who the Leafs wanted to sign out of Harvard a couple years ago, kind of a reclamation project. He was in Buffalo last year, the Rangers before. If you go to Buffalo, I'm sorry, I love the Bills. I've been to a couple Sabres games in Buffalo. I feel for that fan base. If the hockey team had the same success as the football teams currently have, that city would blow up and they'd be in flames, right? So, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see what Joe Thornton can do, especially in these first couple games. Doubleheader against the Sens this weekend. Joe only probably plays one of those two games, but it's going to be great to see Friday and Saturday.
You and I have both enjoyed covering the CCHL and with the Junior A hockey here in Ottawa, of course. One person who made a name for themselves as a coach with the Pembroke Lumber Kings was Leafs head coach Sheldon Keefe, winning and leading that team to 5 consecutive CCHL playoff championships. What did you like from what you saw in his first year behind the NHL bench?
Well, you know what, Ryan? I don't know if you been to the Memorial Center in Pembroke. It's quite the sight to see when you walk
It's
into
a
that.
historical barn. I love the vibes in there.
No, it's terrific. I was there twice last year, and it's terrific. And just to kind of see how Sheldon kind of gives back to that community and still mentions Pembroke every once in a while is pretty cool. But yeah, in terms of the way he performed behind the bench last year, it was kind of tough to judge because when you come in the middle of the season, you're kind of, I know he knows a lot of those guys from his time with the Marlies, but it's kind of tough to try to implement your systems in the way you'd like to in a full training camp. But then the season goes on pause, and then they have that kind of modified bubble training camp. And the Leafs should have won that Columbus series. I'm sure you agree. I'm sure everybody agrees. They probably should have won that Columbus series.
I picked Columbus because I predicted the upset, and I love to put that humble brag in there. But the Leafs, on paper, like they were the better team, and they should have won. I agree with that.
No, and like Jake Muzzin getting hurt, that was a scary injury and lying on the ice there. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see. I know even this year, talking about abbreviated training camps, they've had like a week and a half, and they're playing Wednesday night. Like it's crazy. So I could definitely see some early season jitters between not just the Leafs, but every team in the NHL. And it's going to be really interesting to see how kind of Sheldon develops as an NHL head coach because he's taken the fast track to the league, going from Pembroke to Sault Ste. Marie to the Marlies to the Leafs. Like that's quite the career after playing in the NHL. So yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how Sheldon deploys his lines and how he coaches his team up this year.
Is there anything that, if you had to pinpoint one thing that he could improve on as a coach heading into his first, well, I guess it's not a full season because it's 56 games, but the first time that he will be the coach from the start to the end of the season that he could improve on?
Yeah, it's tough. The power play wasn't great last year, especially with the kind of, it's like Team Canada at the World Juniors. Their power play is, I'm not going to say that's what lost them the gold medal game, but like their power play could have been way better. It's the best Canada team in years, and they didn't end up winning the gold medal. So, of course, your power play is that's definitely a thing. In terms of the way he deploys the lines, of course, the sort decision is going to weigh. Like, a lot of people have been talking about that for this past week since it got announced, right? Looking at, in terms of the way Sheldon can improve, it's interesting because it's all about the ebbs and flows of a season, right? Team can start off how you can win 5-6 straight games to start a season. Everybody's on cloud 9. But then you lose 3 or 4 in a row. and you're kind of like, it's all about maintaining that kind of steady pace all the way through the year, especially with a group as talented as Toronto. Same thing for Ottawa this year. If the Sens get off to a really bad start, it's about getting back to the kind of like 500 range, right? You know what I mean? So it'll be interesting to see what DJ does in Ottawa and what Sheldon does in Toronto. In terms of improvement, though, it's tough for me. It's really tough. I just want to see them win games. Because honest to God, Ryan, I know we went on this at the beginning that I'm not a super fan. I just kind of like, you know what I mean? But I think it's more fun when the Leafs are good. I really do. In 2016-17, the last time, the first year the Leafs made the playoffs and the year that the Sens went to the conference final, the Leafs were one win away from playing the Senators in the first round. How electric would that have been? I want that again here in the Canadian division.
I remember watching the last game of the season and cheering. Like I think it was
Columbus,
against like Columbus or something.
It was, yeah.
And if they won, then they faced the Senators or however that would have worked out. And I was cheering for the result where the Sens would end up playing the Bruins because I knew that was a matchup that would much better favor the Sens. But now a few years later, like Ottawa, with all of the prospects that they have coming up, perhaps in a few years that would be a really amazing series. I don't expect us to see it this year or next year, but a few more years down the road when Ottawa catches up, that would be amazing.
No, for sure. Yeah, and I had tickets to game one of that series actually against Boston, which is funny. We ended up going. Boston won that game 2-1, but yeah, no, for sure. Can't wait for the future of both teams.
Auston Matthews last year was robbed of his first career 50-goal season. He had 47 in 70 games to finish the season, although, of course, if they had finished, he would have perhaps gotten maybe 55. Who knows what he would have been able to do. Going into this season, considering that they will be playing Ottawa and Montreal so many times, two teams that he's had so much success against in his career, what do you think is the ceiling for production for Auston Matthews this season?
I could see a 30-goal season at 56 games, Ryan. I really could. And pretty sure that's going to be kind of the bench. 30 is going to be this year's 50. You know what I mean? In terms of like a benchmark kind of goal scoring tally. And yeah, it's going to be awesome. That's what makes this Canadian division so great. It just sucks we can't go to these games because this would be some of the best hockey we're ever going to see, especially in Ottawa. Like imagine that a Friday, Saturday back-to-back with the Leafs in town with fans in the stands. It'd be bananas. So I think a 30-goal season is totally attainable in 56 games for Auston Matthews, and if he hits that plateau, I think it'd be pretty impressive. It's going to be interesting to see goal scoring around the league this year, though, in terms of what the numbers end up being in the end.
A lot of fans are declaring the Leafs to be a lock to win the North Division, so I'm going to bring up the standings here so we can look at last year and see how close everybody was with each other, except for Ottawa. When you look at the parity in this division, do you think it's fair to call Toronto a lock to win the division, or where do you see them slotting in the standings?
I wouldn't certainly call them a lock. There's a lot of good teams in this Canadian division. Even the Senators, like, I don't know if you saw a Rear Admiral from Spittin' Chicklets put some like futures back down that the Sens are going to win the Cup this year. I'm like, you're kind of out to lunch with that take. But like, they're hard to play against. And if the Sens are flying to Vancouver to play two straight, they're going to split these series, right? So in terms of being a lock, I'm not going to say it's a lock because it's the Leafs, but I do see them as kind of the best team on paper. And then you kind of see Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg kind of in there. Montreal, I don't believe the Montreal hype, to be 100% honest with you. Bringing in Josh Anderson, acting like he's like your superstar player, you're paying $7, like, come on. Especially for a guy that he plays a grit and grind game, and he's like a new era type of player in terms of he can go kill a guy in the corner and then he'll go score a goal, that sort of thing. But wouldn't call them a lock. I'd say they got to make the playoffs in this division, though. The odd teams out, I don't know if you want to get into that. That'll be interesting to see who doesn't make the playoffs in this division because Winnipeg, I don't know about the Jets. Calgary, if they don't get the goaltending that they want out of Markstrom, even though they're paying them the big bucks, it's going to be really interesting.
I agree with you. There's a lot of uncertainty heading into the season in all divisions, but perhaps the North Division being the toughest to predict out of them all. How would the Leafs have to perform for you to consider this season a success? Is it winning a round? Is it winning the North Division? Or where would you draw the line to consider this season to be a complete failure in a scenario where we would see major offseason changes after this year?
These expectations might be through the roof, but I expect them to get out of the North Division in the conference final. I think that's where you got to be at this point if you're this team. You've had years and years and years of failure, and of course, you get the first 2 rounds of the playoffs started with the North Division this year. I think the Leafs got to get out of the North Division and get to the conference final. I think that has to be your benchmark. I really do. That might seem like a lofty goal at this point in time for a team that hasn't won a series since 2004, whenever it's been. But I really do believe that has to be your goal if you're the Leafs.
And if they fail to win a round, would that be where you would call it a failure? If they win one round like that, at least you're improving. But if they have another first round loss, then that's a big deal.
See, the thing last year, if they won that Columbus series, I think people would have called that a success. And that wasn't even really a technical, as you said, a playoff series. They would have went and played Tampa in the second round and probably would have lost. So, or in the first round, I guess it was technically. It's, no, yeah, for sure. If you win a round, I don't know if the swift changes come into effect as quickly as if you don't win a round at all. It's going to be a hell of a season, though. I'm so excited for hockey to come back. I know I'm still kind of in football mode with the Bills still in the playoffs and the Super Bowl coming up in the next couple of weeks. But hockey's going to be fantastic this year, especially in this North Division.
Absolutely. And finally, I'm asking everybody who comes on the show for the preview, do you think that there is a chance in hell that the Ottawa Senators somehow slide into the top 4 and make the playoffs this year?
I'm never going to rule that out. And I want the Sens to succeed. I've always wanted the Sens to succeed. Jimmy Stützle is going to be electric. We all know that. Their goaltending with Matt Murray, he's going to be a big question mark to see if he can kind of get back to what he was like when he knocked the Senators out of the playoffs there in 2017. They added a lot of – it's funny to me. I don't really know if I agree with the way they've kind of constructed their team in terms of adding a lot of these veteran pieces and kind of kicking the young guys to the taxi squad into Belleville. Like, do you really – like that – that Coburn and Cedric Paquette trade, I know it was a money deal. That's exactly what it was. You're getting actual players instead of paying guys on LTIR, but fine, it worked out for both teams. But did you really need to bring Braden Coburn in to take away a spot, for example, from an Eric Branstrom on the back end? I don't know. But is this team more likely to make the playoffs with all these veterans in the line that have that kind of experience? I think they are. So can they slide to that top 4? Sure. You never know. Will they? I don't think so, personally. They're going to be an exciting team to watch, though. I just wish we could go to the games this year.
I agree. Thank you very much for taking the time to come on the show, Matt. Best of luck for the Leafs of every time this year, as long as they're not playing Ottawa, of course, and enjoy the Bills playoff run.
Oh, man, Baltimore Saturday night. When's this going out? Whenever this goes out, I guess before the season starts. But Baltimore Saturday night, go Bells, and it's going to be a heck of a season. I can't wait. Thanks for having me on, Ryan. Really appreciate it.
Take care. Thanks again to Matt Wilson for coming on the show and previewing the season for the Toronto Maple Leafs. I hope everybody enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you like and subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment. Tune in tomorrow as Nathan McCallum will be joining me to preview the season for the Ottawa Senators. Go Sens, go! Peugeot. First round pick, Nason, Silverberg for Ryan, McCulloch, Kovalev, California road trips, Lalim, Hasek, Gerber, carousel of goalies. Buddy Robinson, Ben Harper, Bobby Ryan, Spartacat, Boro, Hoffman, LeBreton is a no-go. Elliott, Anderson, Alex Aldis back again. Dorian says, we're a team, someday we will win the cup. We didn't start the rebuild. It was always brewing since 2009. We didn't start the rebuild. No, we didn't start it, but this time we've got it.